morning, grown-ups. Hi, everyone. I don't have puppets on my hands. I'm in person. My name is Lauren. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the director of children's ministry here at FirstPres. I'm usually with the kids on Sundays, so it's scary and a little exciting to be with you all here today with grown-ups in person in this room. But in this series where we're talking about the idea of new wineskins, I think it's only appropriate that I get out of my comfort zone a little bit, not only in being in here with you, but also in rethinking my own ideas of my own ministry, theology, pedagogy, and ideas about children. So I have 4 kids, and our pediatrician and I were recently talking about birth order, and they explained to me why second children often march to the beat of their own drum. I don't know if any of you have second children. And the reason, he said, was that when a first child is born into a family, the caregivers bend to them, they bend to the caregivers, and together they create this family unit with its own routines, rituals, habits, and then enter second child. They look around, they're small, they're helpless, they're probably, can't even move, and they're already observing, what's going on here? I don't get it. These people all seem to know what's happening and I don't, so forget it. I'm gonna do my own thing. And I have a second child who is definitely lives in her own world, and I sometimes feel punished by the rules of her world, but mostly I feel honored when I'm invited into it. And so I mention this because it's a little bit like what Richard Rohr talks about, in that once you step back from a system and you realize that it's bogus and it wasn't built for you, you're actually free to create your own world. And I can, it's this alternate, or what I want to call an upside down world that when I talk with the kids, this upside down reality and how to get there that our panelists and I are concerned with today, the now and the not yet. And so how do we get there? How do we navigate to the upside down, not the scary Stranger Things version upside down, but the version where all are free, loved, held, and where everyone's needs are met. I'll explain what I mean, but spoiler alert, we have to start from the position of powerlessness. So the explanation behind that, let's rewind history a little bit to when the Bible was written. And Rohr writes about this in chapter 3, which you were all supposed to read, right? But it's okay, I'm giving you the Cliff's Notes through my lens. That in chapter 3 of Jesus' plan for a new world, the story is always true. And sometimes it happened. And I love that because it frees Christians from arguing with ourselves and with others about the fundamentals of our sacred text. The irony Rohr points out about Christian fundamentalists' approach to the Bible is that in being so concerned about the fundamentals, the minutia, the arguments about the infallibility and inerrancy of the Bible, doctrine, dogma, who's in, who's out, we actually miss the fundamental truth that I believe of the Torah is God is love, and of the New Testament that Jesus came to free the literal oppressed. When we accept that the Bible was written by men for their specific communities, passed on verbally for decades before it was ever even written down, we can believe that the Spirit was guiding those people. And so we're also free to believe that the Spirit can lead and inspire us as we approach the Bible today. But just as those writers wrote in a specific context, we too must approach the text from a specific context, from the viewpoint of the poor, the enslaved, and the oppressed, to whom Jesus spoke and for whom the Bible was written in those early days of the Christian church, where the majority of people were powerless in comparison to the 1% of the population that owned the top 50 to 75% of the wealth. Maybe that sounds familiar. This doesn't mean that only the poor can approach Scripture. It doesn't mean that we can't bring ourselves to Scripture. In fact, what it means is actually digging deep into ourselves, uprooting our identities, turning them on their heads to find our original selves before all of the societal messages and scripts about gender and race or class got to us. To identify with, as Rohr writes, our powerlessness instead of our power, our dependence instead of our independence, and our communion instead of our individualism. So no matter who we are, our layered, our intersectional identities, no matter how much privilege or power we have, I can tell one thing about all of you here in this room, whether I know you or not. You have been powerless. You have been dependent. You have lived in communion with others because you were all children once. Rohr writes that we have to come from the side of powerlessness. From the side of power, you have no motivation or reason to build a bridge. You'll stay on your comfy side of the river. From the middle ground that everybody likes to have, you can't build a bridge from the middle. As Rohr says, it's physically impossible. You must experience literal, political, or personal powerlessness in order for your life to be transformed. A rock bottom of sorts, which sounds awful, I know, but if you've ever experienced a rock bottom, you'll know that powerlessness can be a gift. I know that when I had a complete mental breakdown in my early 20s, there was nothing to do but to accept my true and relative and cosmic powerlessness, and to step out from under the illusion that I had any control over my life, and to find a new way forward. And it's from this position of powerlessness that we can truly understand not only Scripture, not only the Sermon on the Mount, which Rohr gets to eventually in his book, but also in order to envision the reign of God as it should be. Only those who possess nothing can be entrusted with everything, right? We're all familiar with the fact that Black, Indigenous, and people of color are marginalized, that our LGBTQ siblings are not always safe and free to be who God created us to be. That this world was not made, physically not made, for people with disabilities or neurodivergence. We know women and people with uteruses are denied control of their own bodies. There are so many groups that are pushed, shoved, literally beaten to the margins. And I would add that children are too. Children are a marginalized group. Children are a marginalized group. And not just in biblical times when Jesus brought the children near to him, and not in another developing nation or in under-resourced schools. Some of you may say, but my child is so spoiled. They have everything they need, right? Yes, I know. No matter how materially spoiled or privileged a child is, in most families, their reality is still that the adults are in control. It's fairly easy, if we have the vocabulary, to hold in our hearts our most vulnerable neighbors. For example, an unhoused, Black, trans, disabled, neurodivergent person. Now, in your minds, just add child to the end of that list. An unhoused, Black, trans, disabled, neurodivergent child, a sweet girl. And you'll find that your heartstrings tug a little harder. And why? Because you too were once a child. You do know what it's like to feel powerlessness. You do know what it's like to feel misunderstood, unheard, unseen. But what do we do with those childhood wounds as we grow into adults? What model are we given to replicate? What worldly goals and dreams are placed into our little heads? Certainly not ones that allow or ask us to remain in that powerlessness. I'm just as responsible as anyone for yielding my adult power and privilege more than necessary, more than to keep my children from running to the street or holding them down for a flu vaccination. I've abused my power. I've failed to relinquish it. I've even craved more of it. And we need to imagine and dismantle all our power structures, including those that affect children. So I'm inviting you today, it's a little bit of a downer, but now we'll pick it up. Whether you're a caregiver, a teacher, a grandparent, or have no relationship with any children except for the one that's inside of you, I'm inviting you to be present, to imagine, to wonder, to turn the world as you know it on its head, to tap into the little Lauren or little Jake inside of you as we listen to our panelists this morning. And right now I'm excited to have Jill Gidlund here with us as she'll be introducing us to the world of godly play, which I hope will help us turn what we think about teaching children on its head, as well as help us to return to our inner child and a childlike way to approach our sacred text. I'd like to invite Jill to introduce herself, how she defines herself, talk a little bit about what godly play is and its benefits, and take us into that world. Move my stuff up.
So this is my first time using one of these fancy things. Is everything okay with that? Oh, yeah, you can hear me okay? Okay, so then I don't have to be linked to anything and I can wander around. Working over here, but I want to sit down just to kind of give us a little taste of that power dynamic that's always in play, right? When you're standing over someone, when you're sitting over someone, it just kind of kicks into gear, doesn't it? So I just want to place myself down here to introduce myself and say, my name's Jill. My pronouns are she, her. I actually grew up in Castro Valley, and my husband and I moved to Berkeley in 2003, and we just moved back to Castro Valley a few years ago. We have 3 children and a dog named Charlie, and it's actually a delight to be here with you today because when we moved back to Castro Valley, everybody was talking about FirstPres Hayward and this amazing community that was giving so much back to this town. And I have felt and experienced the positive energy that this community has put out into this town. So I feel honored to be here and share with you about something that I know a little bit about. My work is in children's spirituality. Oftentimes I'm going into schools and churches and giving presentations to help caregivers and families nurture the children in their midst, their spirituality, thinking about spirituality as part of child development. And the other part of my work is in godly play. So godly play is a contemplative, reflective model of children's church curriculum. So that means there's a lot of silence and wondering in godly play, in addition to storytelling. Godly play is also rooted in Montessori education model. So you might recognize parts of it that look familiar if you know something about Montessori. And godly play has a few core values, which I just think I'll share with you. Oops. And that will actually help describe godly play to you. And then I'm just going to tell you a story because that's the best way to learn a little bit more about it. So one of the core values of godly play is that children are complete spiritual beings. Complete spiritual beings. They're not empty vessels to fill up with spirituality or knowledge about God. Each child is a person who has a personal impression of God. Children are complete spiritual beings, and we can nurture their spiritual development to help them get into touch with that part, but that's our job, not to fill them up with spirituality. Godly play is also child-centered. And so the experience of coming into a godly play circle means that each child is met with dignity and respect. Their experiences and who they are come into that circle, and all that storytelling and that wondering and that silence and those experiences allow the grown-ups and the children there to make meaning. And that's what they're doing in those times. So I could say a lot more, but I think I'm just going to go for it and tell a story. If everyone's ready to hear a story, yeah? Okay. I'm going to orient myself over here to this camera so that we can see this on the ground. And I'm just going to wait a second to see if this is going to be something I can see over here or everyone can see. Yeah, this camera. And it'll be funny because I'm kind of to your side, but I'm also going to look over at you too. Okay. I think they're searching for it. There it is. I see myself. And now we're going to feature it. And this will be the place where you'll see the materials for the story. Okay? Oh, I hid something underneath this couch. And now here it is. It's very gold. You can see that. It looks very precious. And you know, parables are something that's very precious. This looks like a present, like a box that's a present. And parables are presents that you were given even before you were born. Parables are yours. You don't have to earn them or get them in any way. Even if you don't know what a parable is, it's yours. And look, it has a lid. Because you know something else about parables is that sometimes they stay closed to you. And you can come back again and again and again, and it can still feel closed. But if you keep coming back to a parable, sometimes it will open to you. Should we look inside? Yeah, let's do it. I'll put this over here. Here's something to help us tell our story. Yeah. Let's see. It's yellow. It's kind of a round shape. I wonder what this could be. There's nothing in there to help us tell the story. We just have to start. So let's begin. There was once someone who said such amazing things and did such wonderful things that people followed him. And when they were following him, he talked about a kingdom. But it wasn't like the kingdom they lived in. And it wasn't like a kingdom they had ever visited before. It wasn't even like a kingdom they could imagine. And so they had to ask him. And once when they asked him, "What is the kingdom of heaven like?" he said to them, "The kingdom of heaven is like the mustard seed, which is the tiniest of seeds. And if I had it on my finger here, you wouldn't even be able to see it. And a person planted that seed into the ground. And it began to grow and grow and grow. And the birds of the air came and built their nests in it. And now I wonder, do you think the person who planted the seed had a name? You could shout it out if you want, and if you're on Zoom, you could type it into the little box. I wonder if that person had a name. I wonder what that person was doing while that seed was growing. I wonder if these birds were happy when they saw that seed grew into a shrub as large as a tree. I wonder if you've ever come close to a tree like this. I wonder what this tree could really be. And I wonder what this whole place could really be. So I'm going to put back my birds. And the nests, their homes. And my magic tree that grows from the tiniest seed, I'm just going to fold it up like this. And all that yellow, I wonder what that was for.
Let's continue our time together with Jill and also a new guest, Kezia Marshall, who is an adolescent guide at Golden Oaks Montessori School nearby. So I'm going to ask a few questions, and Kezia and Jill are going to share their wisdom about children. We did want a child up here to share their own wisdom, but we couldn't find anyone that was willing. Kezia, I wonder if you could introduce yourself and tell us how you define yourself and what guides you and your guiding teaching practice.
I can't see everybody.
Yeah.
My name is Kezia, and I am an adolescent guide at, now we're called Hayward Twin Oaks Montessori because we just merged from a 1st through 8th to 1st through 12th. I go by the pronoun she, her. I would best describe myself, and I know we were talking about this the other day, as a mother and a sister. Those are my two important roles, I believe, that I have in this life. And I try to go from the place as sister first. I think that's given me the most empathy. It was a really important role that I had as a child. My parents worked a lot, and I took care of my younger siblings. And I have an older brother and a younger brother who passed away at a very young age, and it's just my sister and I now. And I think going from that place of compassion, of seeing everyone, especially when my brothers passed, of seeing sort of their light in everyone and seeing a lot of the things I love best about them in so many people, has given me empathy and love for many. And I use that in my practice as a teacher, as a sister, someone that cares for these students so much and loves them so much, and will work with them coming from a place as a sibling, as a sister.
Thanks. Jill, is there anything that you left out from before about what guides you that you'd like to add?
I think that really thinking about spirituality as a part of child's development really has helped me in my work with children in all settings. Just thinking about them, they're the same as me. We're all on a journey. I'm not going to figure it out. I can't help them really figure it out. I can only walk alongside.
Beautiful. Kezia, many of us are parents or caregivers here. And as I said before, I know I'm guilty of replicating power dynamics, acting out the scripts I've been given, the illusion that power is given to me. And so I hesitate to even use the word power here because we're trying to disrupt things. So I do wonder, how do you, for lack of a better term, empower children in your practice, especially those at the margins, to grow and live into who God created them to be in the power structures as they exist now, like navigating that, but also being able to live like freely, creating what the world that they want to see.
Yeah, I think Montessori does have that embedded in a lot of the pedagogical practice. One thing is viewing the learning space is not as my classroom, but as a shared space where we are learning together. Changing that word from teacher to guide. I'm learning too all the time, and being able to listen to the students. We have community meetings where they share their concerns. We do things like Socratic dialogue where I don't even speak, they're just speaking to each other. I'm just asking questions maybe. And I think the students building their expectations based off of what we think our foundational morals are as a community is a really important thing for them to do, and help to hold them accountable to each other. So we have our learning pillars. One is learning, one is respect, one is hard work and community. And the students build their own expectations for how we're going to navigate through the year together based upon those foundations. And that gives them this word, maybe not empowers, but gives them that advocacy. So if they could advocate for themselves and they could advocate for others as well, is a big part of our whole school's sort of understanding of how we're going to work with each other.
Yes, I love the advocacy part. I think that's what we're all really meant here and meant to do, right? Jill, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I feel like there is something about when adults can show restraint from exercising their power that is a place to begin. So in every situation, grown-ups usually have the last word, and just choosing not to. Instead of explaining something, letting someone else, a younger person, figure it out and tell you. Asking questions that you really don't know the answer to and be willing to not know. Those kinds of just like postures, and just try to practice. Because for me, it's, especially with my children, I feel like I kind of have ideas about what lack of respect means and disobedience. And I think it's just from, how I was raised and how I grew up and the world that I lived in. And I find myself going to those places, and then I have to practice stopping myself short.
I don't know if you have any adolescents, Jill, but Kezia, Montessori education definitely seems like one example of new wineskins, right? Even though it's been around a long time, it still feels kind of radical and uncomfortable for people. And I know you work with adolescents, so I'd love if you could tell us a little bit about your plans and vision to take, what maybe some of us generally know about Montessori, like even further than a lot of Montessori schools in the United States at least have.
Yeah, I work with a close friend, a colleague, and we split up the subjects with each other, and we're sort of thinking about building our own school, our own train of thought, just going back and forth with what we've experienced at the school that we're at now and how to take it one step further. One of the Montessori comes with materials is very similar with what Jill presented to you with storytelling and presenting materials students can sort of touch, but at the adolescent level, they think in the abstract. So we don't have materials like the upper and lower elementary students do. The material is the land. And usually, so adolescents are supposed to live on a farm and they have a shop and they're sort of practicing adulthood in a very safe environment where the adults are there to protect them from harm so that they can be vulnerable in that space. So we'd love to have a space for them where they can work with the land and learn off of that. One of the most important and inspirational things that have happened to me as a teacher is when we took our students to a farm and I saw Montessori just come into play so wonderfully. These students picked up these apples that had fallen from the tree and they started putting it in the juicer and they were going back and forth trying to grind the apples into juice, and they worked for a really long time just focused on being able to make enough juice for the entire community. And there were other students doing other things at the time. Some students were making tortillas and others were making different parts of what would be a community meal later. But when we all sat down together, these girls were giving everyone juice. There wasn't even enough juice for them to have for themselves, but they were handing out juice to everyone with so much pride, and they were checking in with students. Did you like the juice? Did you enjoy the juice? And it wasn't we weren't doing math problems, we weren't reading a book or anything, but something really important was happening for the children in that moment, for all of them. They were able to provide for the community and they were able to feel pride in that. So in the adolescent, when they're so sort of self-involved, Montessori calls it the age of rudeness, it's hard for them to get out of themselves. Giving them those opportunities where they can provide for the larger community is so important because it lets them know that you're so a part of this, you're so a part of something bigger than yourself, and you have a place in this, and you're so important. And something as small as being able to provide juice for the community, which seems like something so small, something so big that it triggers something for their development, that later on the hope is that's a seed that's been planted that will grow into something bigger one day. So that advocacy comes into play, where they're advocating for others. And so building a school that is based off of social justice and equity and inclusion, and it gives students those opportunities to provide for the outside community so that they understand that they are a part of something bigger than themselves, but also providing a school where a lot of students that wouldn't have access to a Montessori education are able to come in and experience that.
That's so cool, and I'm gonna reflect on that and how I treat my adolescents. Some of them might be in this room, so apple
We'll
juice.
hold you to
Apple
it.
juice every day. No, we do have chickens. Have you done the chicken chores lately? Jill, you've already addressed the value of godly play. I think, or maybe didn't quite, like for for us, like as a church, like us seeing this approach and learning something from it, do you have any advice for those of us who have small humans at home in our care? If not, like actually doing godly play, like what are some elements that we could take that or principles to shape our home life and try some new wineskins at home?
Well, maybe just to address the idea of godly play in the church setting and kind of the function of that real quick. One thing that godly play can do is because it is centering the child, and generally, churches have a view of children where they're not featured or centered in the experience, because there's a space for the children to be centered. It can reorient the whole church and give the opportunity for some of that hierarchical thinking to kind of get challenged. And so I think bringing godly play into a church can help that happen, and also give children a chance to learn religious language so that their personal image of God and the church God can kind of come together and not be at odds, where oftentimes that's the real experience for us. We come into a place where there is a view of God that doesn't match what we are, and we feel we need to conform. And I think godly play gives the opportunity for that to blend instead. So then at home, I think one of my favorite things is to have a space in your home that is a sacred spot. It's like my favorite thing. And a sacred spot is a place in your home that you make for God. It's a space for God. And it's a space to mark time and remember what season you're in. And if that space is accessible to the children in your home or in your life to come and enjoy and interact with, then you are validating what they can bring to an altar. And you're validating what they bring to a space for God. And so you're kind of living out that idea. I also think that really listening with your whole self to what children are telling you, and really respecting that they are bringing a perspective that you don't know, and valuing that is a huge thing that you can do in your own home or with any children you meet anywhere. Anyone in your family, strangers. If you listen to a child with respect, it's good for everyone. It's good for yourself, and it's good for them as well. And listening with that part of yourself that holds power, not just listening with your polite, surfacey self, but actually the part that can be challenged. That's something that not many adults know how to do, but can learn to do.
Thank you. And I think you have an Instagram at
I do.
Sacred Spots at Home.
That's right, Sacred Spots at Home.
Sacred Spots at Home,
Yep.
if you want an idea of what
Yep.
a sacred spot at home looks like. Yep. So lastly, Kezia, I'll ask you too, if you have any practical advice, given your wisdom as a parent or a guide, for ways we can create and pour into new wineskins at home, and maybe some advice on how we can live our daily lives from a position of that, as we're talking about today, sort of powerlessness, that's constantly acknowledging and maybe shifting our power back to kids, and how do we build those bridges? And I would be particularly interested in how to build them with adolescents, so from not our power, but from our powerlessness.
Yeah, I think it's really important to come from a place of empathy, especially for adolescents that are from 12 to 15. They're shifting from childhood, and they're sort of grieving. Their childhood is gone. Now they're adolescents. Montessori says, an adolescent should never be called a child again. That period in their life is gone now. And I think that's sad for a lot of them, experiencing that and sort of seeing the world in a different light. And they're in this in-between of, okay, I am an adolescent, I'm not an adult, and I'm still getting treated like a little kid. So it's really confusing for them what their role is. And at the same time, they're self-constructing, so they're building their own personality. So giving them a lot of space for that is really important, and same listening, asking curious questions. And even when it seems like they don't want to connect with you, they very much do. So it's very interesting. It's sort of like a dance with my students. It seems like they hate me sometimes. But I know that's not true. At recess, they're trying to connect with me very deeply, or, they'll come up to me and want to show me their work, and just giving space. Like, I know 10 seconds ago, you were like, are you going to stop talking now? But then, 15 minutes later, you're like, Miss Kezia, I really want to show you what I just worked on right now. So sort of kind of going with their flow and understanding that they're trying on all these different hats in that process of trying to develop who they are as a person, who they want to be. They're going to try on all these different personalities. I would say that listening to the adolescent and their perspective, whether you agree with it or not, is so important to give them that space. And also apologizing when you do something wrong is extremely important to them. It's so validating to hear that the adult was wrong in that time, in that space, and being very clear about and specific, whether you're specifically praising them for something or you're specifically apologizing for something where you came from. I noticed that my tone was not what I wanted it to be like, and next time I want to make sure that when we speak, that we can have a one-on-one conversation where I'm treating you with the respect that I want to be treated with too, because that's what they crave for. They want that connection with the adult in a way where they're being seen as a person, as you would want to be seen. So sort of humbling yourself, and I talk a lot with teachers at the school about this. It's very, very humbling to work with adolescents because you're constantly saying, I was wrong there. And we're not used to doing that as adults, but it is so crucial to do that with adolescents and telling them, I was wrong, I made a mistake. Can you tell me how you felt in that moment? And giving space for that would be probably the number one thing to do.
Thank you. That's refreshing to hear and challenging. Thank you so much for sharing with us today. I hope that all of you felt seen and held and loved in some way today. And someone else is going to take it away.